The art of misdirection is key to any good magician's credibility. I say credibility because you wouldn't believe a magician who couldn't trick you. And for that, it can be assumed that they've mastered misdirection, a form of deception. Another that's skilled in the art of deception is the con artist, be it through misdirection, skilled silver-tongued oratory, or just plain impersonation. The con artist is the Swiss Army knife of deception for personal gain. Now, the elitist politician, they combine the skill of both the con artist and the magician to pull off the biggest trick of them all, making you believe that you're in control and actually benefiting from their deception. In episode 174 of American Reveille with James Lane, I show you what the left is really hiding in the shadow of woke America. Our allies, they're laughing at us as France calls out America's woke radicalization. Playboy just put a dude on the cover. Teen Vogue is brainwashing our kids to be socialists, and they're doing it through woke propaganda. Meanwhile, America's generals have gone woke and turned against the American people. All of this while the elites hide a dark and terrible secret right in the shadows of wokeness. You ever hear the expression, you can spray paint a turd gold, but it's still a turd? The elites are they're shoving their socialist utopia right down our throats. All this while American children are dying in Afghanistan. That's right, folks. They're dying in Afghanistan. So I have a question for you. I have one simple question. Do I have your attention yet? Ladies and gentlemen, James Lane here, and this is episode 174 of American Reveille. On today's episode, we're going to address how the left uses wokeness as a weapon to distract us from the bigger picture. But first, do me a favor, hit the like button, the subscribe button, share this show with your friends and family, and if you're watching on Rumble, Gab TV, BitChute, or YouTube, please do me a favor and subscribe to my channel. Hit the notification bell. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave me a 5-star rating right now. Do it right now. Don't do it later. Just do it right now. Trust me, it helps the American Reveille, and we are worth it. As you know, folks, we're fighting some of the most insane censorship we've ever seen. Some of you don't realize that we aren't just a podcast, but we're also a digital publication with room for more writers, more podcasts, more talent. So do me a favor, please go to www.americanreveille.com. That's American Reveille, Reveille, and bookmark the site. Go bookmark the site. I know you'll enjoy it just as much as, if not more, than any of the other conservative publications out there. I promise. So go to AmericanReveille.com right there and bookmark the site. You can also sign up for the newsletter there. I'll send you updates once a week so we can keep connected. But there's also a short disclaimer I want to give you. Folks, I run a company with a unique outlook on things. We're a hard-hitting conservative podcast and digital publication emphasizing the truth from the perspective of the American patriot. This means that I publish content from writers and bloggers that have different viewpoints, different beliefs, sources, and different opinions. It's not strange to find a pro-vax blog with data to back it up on my website. And that'll be right next to an anti-vax blog with just as much credible data. I enlighten you with stories, I empower you with the information, and I entertain you with the right to make your own choices. So with that being said, we begin today's show by talking about how other countries view the United States right now. Well, you tell me. How does the world see the United States right now? What words come to mind? Unreliable? Would you rely on a friend who leaves people behind in Afghanistan, let's say? Untrustworthy? Would you trust a friend who lies all the time? Divided? Don't you think the world is watching us? Don't you think our allies, not just our enemies, but our allies are watching us? Would you listen to a friend whose ideas would hurt or damage your family and future? Would you? Since Trump left office, everything has been falling apart. It was slow at first, but now it's caught up and everybody's seeing it. The border's not just a mess. It's literally hell. People are dying. Women and children are being trafficked. They're being raped. It's the worst we've seen in my entire lifetime. China just invaded Taiwan's airspace again. That's 2 or 3 times now, 2 or 3 times. And if China took Taiwan, that literally could be a World War III triggering moment. Folks, American kids, like I mentioned in the intro, American kids are dying in Afghanistan right now, and the news isn't reporting it. They're not reporting it at all. And we'll talk about that more later in the show. Inflation, it's moving so fast. And millions of people, they're on the verge of losing everything. And the elites are pushing socialism so hard that it makes you wonder if they're trying to pass the huge $3.5 trillion bill to possibly lessen the blow of some looming economic crash that we may not be aware of. Some crash from hell, something big that no one has ever seen before. Meanwhile, the left is waving their hands in the air. Misdirection, that thing we talked about in the intro there, waving their hands in the air, screaming, look how amazing, look how progressive we are. Look at all the amazing woke things that are happening. Spray painting the turd of socialism gold and calling it new and shiny, when really it's just the same old shh. So do you need more proof? Do you need more in-your-face stories telling you that our allies have something to say on the subject? Well, they do. They do have something to say on the subject. And I want you to check this article out on foxnews.com. France rejects American woke culture that is racializing the country. Some prominent French figures, including President Emmanuel Macron, are rejecting woke ideology that has been imported from the United States amid a breakdown in relations between the two nations. A cover story by, and I'll try my best not to butcher this, Le Spectacle du Monde is one of France's leading magazines. It recently ran a piece titled The Suicide of America, in which it blames the deadly withdrawal from Afghanistan on, get this, a woke dictatorship, and questioned whether the American empire was collapsing. Now, the article also took American universities to task over the alleged extremism and censorship on campuses. The story cited Yale University, where school officials urged students to reconsider costumes for Halloween that might be racially insensitive. And folks, this isn't the only thing. We know where this comes from. We know that the woke ideology, the socialist doctrine, has infected most of our universities in the United States. We know that they've gone as far as banning a rock. They got rid of a rock from campus because they thought it was racist. It was one of the campuses. They've gotten rid of teachers. Students have been attacked, harassed, removed from areas of the school. All the while racism, all the while segregation, all kinds of horrible things are being implemented at these schools and taught to our children. So no wonder other countries are taking notice. All the while we are causing death and destruction to our own citizenry. I see that our society is becoming progressively racialized, Macron said. Several members of his government have also shared anti-woke views, including Elizabeth Moreno, the French delegate, Minister for Gender Equality and Diversity. The woke culture is something very dangerous, and we shouldn't bring it to France, she told Bloomberg News in May, which is very interesting because here in America, the woke culture is merged with this whole gender equality and diversity scene, with the whole rights for LGBT, with the entire minority community inclusion initiative, everything that you could think of where you would want people to get together, where you'd want to build actual equality, that's been replaced by equity. That's been replaced by Marxism here in America. So you can see a very big contrast, a very big difference there. You have one place where equality and diversity means one thing. That's something different in France. While here in America, equality and diversity means something different to many different people in this country. A panel at the year's, I'll try this one too, Tocqueville, not Tacoville, but Tocqueville conversations near Normandy discussed the perceived decline of free speech and expression in the United States that some attribute to woke culture. Most of us attribute it to woke culture. Quote, our mantra is that we should talk even if we strongly disagree. Nothing prevents you from talking and exchanging and dialoguing. Jean Guillaume de Tocqueville, the descendant of the 19th century liberal philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville, told the news outlet, quote, the French Revolution was an event that led to a bloody civil war because the people who were not in agreement with the new ideas, the really revolutionary ideas, were just killed and beheaded. It was not a good way to debate. And how many other historical examples do we need about where this leads, where the woke ideology goes, where distracting us from the real chaos in the country and the real horror in the world with woke progressive psychobabble, the craziness, the ideology, the distraction, where does it lead? History tells us where it leads. The French Revolution knows about it. World War II knows about it. You can ask Stalin about it. Oh, well, you know what I mean. You can ask all of the people around the world that have experienced it, dead or alive, in recent history, or 50, 100 years, 200 years ago. This is nothing new. Ladies and gentlemen, what's happening is nothing new. We just have social media and cell phones to have a bird's eye view of the party as it's all burning to the ground. All right, folks, as it's all burning to the ground. Now that I'm off my soapbox, the French criticism of the U.S. comes amid a fracture in American-French relations. French Secretary of State, not French Secretary of State, excuse me. American, he might as well be because I don't believe he's real either, but Secretary of State Antony Blinken is slated to travel to France next week after Australia canceled a deal to purchase a French submarine in favor of creating a new Indo-Pacific security agreement with Washington and the United Kingdom. In an unprecedented move, Macron recalled its ambassadors to the United States and Australia. That is a big deal. All right. The left tries to soften the blow. The progressives, the woke folks, they try to soften the news. They try to make you forget that bad news is happening around the world, that bad news bears is coming to the shores of the United States by making the United States even worse, at least seem even worse than the events that are happening around the world. But you can't hide it from us forever. You can't keep us in the dark forever. We see you. We see you. So as we all know, Australia has gone mega woke. Just look at how they've treated their people during COVID. The lockdowns in Australia are worse than anywhere in the world. The entire world. It's really becoming a socialist hellscape, which is giving merit to the name the land down under. Now, we all know that the UK has been all in on the climate change Kool-Aid, and it's importing illegals by the boatload, literally by the boatload. And we all know that Boris Johnson, he's a closet case liberal. We know that 100%. This woke ideology, it's like a virus. It's spreading across the globe, nation to nation, country, across all different countries, landscapes, cultures, languages, it doesn't matter. This woke ideology is a poison. It's a poison, and it's seeped into every facet of life. They teach it in our schools and present it in our media. It's like it has a life of its own. It's right here, and it's right here in our backyard. It's in every single state. It's in every single city across the United States. And while the world burns and the country descends into chaos, the elites put a guy on the cover of Playboy and tell us that gender isn't real. They tell us our biology makes us evil. They piss on us and tell us it's raining. I want you to take a look at this article from Breitbart.com so you know I'm not BSing you. There it is. Playboy celebrates first ever male cover model, Bretman Rock. Quote, a huge deal for the LGBT community. All right, let's read this. Playboy has put a male bunny on its latest cover. It's funny. I couldn't even think of anything to say. I just had to go right into let's read this because it's just so ridiculously unnecessary that it blanks the slate in my mind and it just makes me speechless. Let's read this. Playboy has put a male bunny on its latest cover, making Filipino-born beauty influencer Bretman Rock its October digital cover model. Folks, this doesn't even look like a woman. If you're listening and you're just tuning in, we're talking about Playboy celebrating its first ever cover model, its male cover model. And I want to describe to you, this is a Filipino guy, all right, a small-boned yet muscular statured tan gentleman, all right. Even with all of the makeup, it still looks like a dude. It's a tattooed dude wearing a bunny costume with his butt hanging out and his torn nylons on, giving you the magnum from that movie. What is that? Zoolander, right? The magnum. He's giving you that duck lip look that all the Instagram models like to give. I don't know what has gone wrong in this country. All right. But this woke nonsense has got to stop. And I wanted to bring you this story. I wanted to bring you all of these stories to paint the picture that this show is going to paint this week. All right. That this woke world has taken over. And meanwhile, everything in the background, the stuff that you're not seeing, is falling apart. It's completely falling apart. Let's keep reading, guys. The once iconic magazine is celebrating Bretman Rock's cover spot as a milestone for the LGBT community. The photo and accompanying video showing Rock posing in Playboy's traditional bunny costume, complete with high heels, rabbit ears, and a bushy tail. Really quick, let me ask you a question, because I know Playboy, it's not the most explicit. It's not a hustler, right? It's not going for the colonoscopy, all right? It tries to be tasteful, as they call it. So is this guy here, all right, and that's what he is. He's a guy. Is he going to just stand there topless? Here's my guy nipples, or is he going to show part of his anatomy? Is there going to be part of his male anatomy on there with the goal of selling it to young men as natural and normal? I'm curious, but not curious enough to go take a look. I never want to take a look. Quote, for Playboy to have a male on the cover is a huge deal for the LGBT community. For my brown people community, it's just so surreal, Rock said. A total in this even effing, is this even effing happening right now type of vibe. And I'm so pretty. That's what he said. He said, it's Bretman, bitch. Copying Britney Spears. Rock, 23, currently stars in his own MTV reality show that streams on YouTube. So while they censor my content on YouTube, this guy right here, he gets his own MTV show. He also appeared in the YouTube original series 30 Days with Bretman Rock, which followed him and his friends on their adventures in the wilderness. Lovely. The beauty influencer has amassed millions of social media followers for his styling and makeup tips, as well as his workouts and interactions with family members. See, that's what gets millions of hits on social media, folks. Not God, not guns, not liberty, not family, not fundamentals. Nope. Bretman Rock and his maximum mandatory, magnificent makeup tips. Amazing, folks. Absolutely amazing. Playboy, which has always been left-wing, of course, in terms of politics and social issues, has grown increasingly woke since the late founder Hugh Hefner stepped down from the company. The magazine announced its first transgender playmate in 2017, putting male-to-female French model Ines Rao on its centerfold spread. I forgot all about it, and I hoped that was the last time they did it, but no. Now this is all normalized. Now this is a part of our life. Being a normal, married, heterosexual male or female is bad in 2021 United States of America. The year before, a Muslim journalist became the first woman to pose in a hijab for the magazine. Playboy shut down its print edition last year, probably because of the 2017 article, at the height of the coronavirus pandemic after nearly 7 decades as the country's premier adult magazine for men. The company still publishes online with the occasional print product. So tell me, how is that not brainwashing our kids? Do you read Playboy? I'm a 36-year-old man. I don't need Playboy. I don't read Playboy. But you know who's interested in Playboy? Young people, at least, were interested in Playboy when I was young. So I'm going to assume that young people today who may be inexperienced as where to go, maybe to find material for their urges, maybe, just maybe they seek out Playboy due to its reputation, due to its popularity. 70 years, it's a long time. So maybe they get exposed to this kind of material against their will, right? You say, well, they purchased the digital publication. They went and took a look. Well, they were looking for one thing and they found another. That wasn't what they were looking for. That's not what the reputation of Playboy is selling. That's not the product that they are trying to purchase. They say it's a huge victory for the LGBT community, but I find this to be very malicious. The LGBT community, they once wanted to be equal and just do their own thing, but now they want LGBT ideology to be the law of the land and all beliefs and science to be stricken from the land. I don't think this is the entire LGBT community. Let me make myself clear. But here's what I believe. What I believe is that a Marxist, militant segment of the LGBT community, controlled by woke progressive elites, has taken over the LGBT agenda and is now pushing it as hard as they can. The elites hit our kids from every angle, and it almost feels impossible to fight. Teen Vogue magazine, you remember Teen Vogue, guys? Teen Vogue, regardless of what it used to be, is now a socialist propaganda machine made to convince gullible young people to join the revolution. And unfortunately, folks, I'm not talking about Purple Rain. No, my friends, while the United States gets weaker and our enemies contemplate banding together to destroy us all, Teen Vogue is focused on woke racism and more psychobabble. Check this one out from Joshua Klein on Breitbart. Teen Vogue urges Biden to transform white men's Fed for BIPOC communities' economic progress. The Federal Reserve is, quote, the brainchild of 6 white men, which favors corporate America and Wall Street, quote, instead of for struggling workers. And President Biden should radically transform the institution into a force fighting climate change, fighting for climate change, and for the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities' economic progress if he really intends to build back better, according to an op-ed published in Teen Vogue on Tuesday. My God, why is this in Teen Vogue? Why do kids have to deal with this? Why do I have to listen to people like Greta Thunberg say blah, 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 instead of actually having a thought in their head that means something? Why do they have to keep coming after our children? The woke poison is right here. This woke poison is unmistakable, and you're going to see the key tenets of it in this article. In the essay titled, quote, What is the Federal Reserve And why does it matter? Political director of the Action Center on Race and the Economy, Vasudha Desikn, and Public Citizen Senior Climate Finance Policy Advisor, Tracy Lewis, argue that the Federal Reserve should be radically transformed into an institutional force for economic progress. You see, economic progress sounds great, but they changed the definitions. Progress to them economically means socialism, means all of us make the same and stay at the same wages and do exactly what we're told. You notice these people's jobs? You notice this group of jobs have just seemed to appear even though they were always here in the background. Look how long this is. This is the political director of the Action Center on Race and the Economy. That's 11 words in Vasudha's job title. And Public Citizen Senior Climate Finance Policy Advisor. That's 7 words in Tracy Lewis's job title. How many words are in your job title? Do you know what I've noticed in my life and I've seen in my career? The more words you have in your job title, the more your job is full of sh and made of BS. BS job titles require lots of words, folks. The op-ed begins by asking readers to imagine cities purchasing and renting out vacant homes to communities at a reasonable price, retrofitting local infrastructure to protect from future flooding, and safeguarding collective physical safety and economic wellness because the government chooses to prioritize us over Wall Street. You hear the keywords there? Collective, right? Collective. Reasonable price. Vacant homes to communities. They're trying to bunch people up in their own groups, ladies and gentlemen. It's all a part of socialism. It's all a part of socialism. Quote, "This is not an impossible dream, and we're not actually that far from its reality," the essay says. And the essay is not wrong. They're not wrong. They almost got through the $3.5 trillion social infrastructure deal that would usher forward a future of psychotic socialist spending in this country. All right. It would literally open the door for this to become a reality. We've stalled it for now, but we still have work to do. We still have work to do. And that's for another podcast, another article, and another time. All right. Urging President Biden to garner courage to seize the moment and utilize the opportunity to transform the Federal Reserve into an institutional force for economic progress for BIPOC communities. When choosing its next chair, the two claimed his upcoming decision could shape his legacy as a champion for racial justice. Ding, ding, ding. Keyword. Racial justice. It doesn't mean what it sounds like, folks. Referring to the Fed as the brainchild of 6 white men, the essay claims little has changed regarding its leadership since. More than 100 years later, not much seems to have changed with its leadership. The current Fed board is entirely white, majority Republican, and has a deep history in the private sector. I just want you to ask yourself, all right, what conservatives, what Republicans stand for financially, and what Democrats stand for financially. One argues again and again and again and again and again about responsible spending, as I'm sure you know, and it's something we need with inflation going through the roof. You know how hard it is right now to buy and to survive. While Democrats want to spend, which is what you see right now from Biden, his administration, and the Democrat House. And that is why you see them fail. It is not a policy that is sustainable in the United States of America. It's not, but that is what Teen Vogue wants. That's what the socialists wants. That's what the radical left want. That's what the progressive elites want. Spend and extract the wealth from the backs of the American people while disguising it as help for the American people, while describing it as compassion, while describing it as racial justice. It's little wonder then that the Federal Reserve has repeatedly used its massive toolbox to favor corporate America and Wall Street instead of for struggling workers, climate justice, or municipalities, it continues. I think climate justice is BS. It's a made up word. Climate justice. We have to form the climate police. We have to get those climate bad guys. I know what we can do. We need to, somebody go get me the script for the original Captain Planet cartoon. We have work to do. Folks, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Climate justice. Tree equity, folks. Tree equity. It then accuses today's Fed of propping up corporate America while the COVID pandemic further devastates Black and brown communities. Though the Fed has extraordinary authority, and that's always what the left, the progressives, the socialists, that's always what they scream for. That's what Team Vogue is screaming for. They say it refuses to use its power to do more good because of the current chair, Jerome Powell, and his history. Quote, before coming to the Fed, Powell, who you can see in this picture right here, was a partner at the Carlyle Group, a private equity firm known for buying up companies and making them profitable by laying off workers and breaking up unions, it reads. I don't know if you knew this, ladies and gentlemen, but you can be a worker, you can have a company, you can even work together with other people, and you can do it without a union. When corporate profitability is placed above the needs of the worker, inequality thrives. There's another keyword. They love using it, inequality. It continues, claiming that Powell's tenure saw bank mergers surge as many COVID-hit majority Black cities were left out of a direct lending program from the Fed that didn't appear to adequately account for which municipalities needed the most help. The essay then accuses the Fed of practices which deepen racial and economic disparities. And what I'll add to this is that wokeness itself, this cry for racial justice under the guise of doing something good while truly enacting socialist policies, that is what's actually creating racial and economic disparities in this country. Quote, federal aid funded programs that were meant to uplift small businesses and protect vulnerable workers were exploited by large companies and have clubby relationships with national banks. They have clubby relationships with national banks. The Fed didn't and doesn't do enough to regulate those relationships. This is how generational racial and economic disparities deepen. But where does it begin, folks? Where does it begin? It begins in school. What are we teaching our children? And you know exactly what public schools are teaching our children. Suggesting climate change will only make these disparities worse, the essay slams the Fed for inadequate action on climate change under Powell and for only recently taking baby steps to address it. Quote, before the 2008, the Fed failed to take speculative mortgages by big banks seriously, and now it is not doing enough to stop the financing of fossil fuels, which are decimating our planet. The two write. And the other day, I just remembered this, and I want you to know this. They asked Jen Psaki directly if Biden is still planning on getting rid of fossil fuels, of not giving government money to companies going after the fossil fuels, fueling our country, keeping our electricity online, you know, all of that good stuff that they want to replace with windmills that are going to cause blackouts in this entire freaking country and use even more fossil fuels to build. They asked Psaki if Biden still plans to defund fossil fuels, and she unequivocally told them his agenda from the beginning was as such, and he continues to strive to do so. He is still looking to destroy oil in the United States. He's still looking to do that. I just wanted to add that in there. It says, it feels like our government has learned nothing from the Great Recession. It says that right there, although they're manipulating the facts for their own Marxist gain. The two claim their only hope or life jacket in this endless sea of troubles, and I'll add that it's created by the left, is the future appointment of women leaders. I say it's the future appointment of the most qualified candidate to do the job, not start the revolution. What gives us hope is thinking about the women who could potentially take over as leaders of the Federal Reserve and shape it as a real force for racial and climate justice, they write. It has nothing to do with what the Federal Reserve does. We're most excited about Lisa Cook, a Michigan State University economist, of course, focused on Black economic history, and Sarah Bloom Raskin, a lawyer and former Fed governor who's been sounding the alarm on climate change. How's this help our economy? Calling them leaders with the creativity and willingness. See, that's what they disguise destruction with, creativity. They want somebody to come in and blow up the system, and they're going to call that creativity. And willingness, the will to rebuild something psychotic on top of the old system. To center economic policymaking on communities that are still reeling from 2008 and are on the front lines of climate change. The two conclude by arguing that appointing such women leaders would be the president's chance to truly build back better. If President Biden really wants to build back better, he'll take this opportunity to shape the Fed into a force for justice for Americans who've been excluded for too long. A Federal Reserve that works for all of us, they write. In August, Teen Vogue urged its young readers to mobilize, see, they're radicalizing kids, to mobilize towards building a socialist future. Ding, 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 fire alarms going off. Don't have to really dig too much deeper than that, guys. It says they also stated they want to shift the tide in favor of socialism, describing it as, quote, the only system that'll guarantee us as a livable planet and life unburdened from economic exploitation, crushing debt, and racial castes, while claiming there is no future for us under capitalism. Don't you love it when all of the people, at least a lot of them, who knew about socialism, they die, and then a bunch of young kids are sold a stupid story by a bunch of liars, and now they all want to freaking be socialists because, 100 million plus dead people around the world doesn't mean anything. It's not true. Remember, the Holocaust isn't real. AOC cried. She cried when they struck down her defunding of the Iron Dome in Israel. Folks, this is a new world. This is a new country, a country full of people that hate it, a country that want to see it die. And it says right here, quote, at its core, this is what they believe. This is what they posted for our kids. This is what they posted in Teen Vogue. At its core, America's values are white supremacy and capitalism. That is true no matter who has been in office. That is what they believe. That is what they're selling the children across the United States and across the world. That our country is evil. That our country is racist. That white people are evil. I don't know about you, but that sounds very, very familiar to other groups in history. That sounds very familiar. And it's dancing on dangerous grounds. Dangerous grounds, ladies and gentlemen. You heard that last line, didn't you? America's values at its core. America's values are white supremacy and capitalism. Let me say that again in case you didn't hear me. At its core, this was the last line in the article, America's values are white supremacy and capitalism. This is Psychology 101. They're literally conditioning people to associate white supremacy with capitalism. They're teaching our kids that our current way of life is evil. Why? Why would they teach our kids to hate our country by lying about capitalism? Well, it's a super simple answer. Many of the people in power today, people you've never even heard of, they're socialists. They're socialists. And you might ask, is this real? How did this happen? How did this happen, James? Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you exactly how this happened. They were protesters. They were protesters in the 1960s. They grew up on this. They've always been radicals. And now they run the show. Plain and simple. They run the show. End of story. Pass the ketchup. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. They are at the highest levels of government, technology, business, media, education, and industry. And the most disturbing realization is that the woke military-industrial complex, if our military has gone woke, all right, this is the most disturbing thing of them all. If our military has gone woke, how can it protect us? How can it be effective if our military has gone woke? If the woke industrial complex is a thing, how can they be effective? And will they be used against us? Could they be used against us? It creates so many questions. and even more terrifying scenarios. And if you don't believe a government would turn on its people, just take a look at Australia. Or why don't you ask Joe Biden about the Americans he left behind in Afghanistan? I agree wholeheartedly with the caption on this next article from AmericanMind.org. It says, America's woke generals and the military-industrial complex must be purged to save the nation. This is Deep State, Deep Trouble by Josiah Lippincott. Revelations from a new book, Peril, by Bob Woodward and Rob Costa reveal just how deep the spiritual rot in the military goes. In the days after the January 6th protest, General Mark Milley, seen right here with his 10,000 rows of ribbons to show how big his e-peen is, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, promised, in the event of a war, to give aid and comfort to China, our adversary, China. According to the Washington Post, after the Capitol protest, Milley sent secret communications to the head of the People's Liberation Army promising that if we were going to attack, I'm going to call you ahead of time, and it's not going to be a surprise. In a decent country, such a brazen act of collusion with a foreign power by one of the most prominent leaders of the armed forces would be met with immediate and unrelenting backlash. Instead, this betrayer of the Constitution and the principle of civilian leadership of the military is a liberal darling. At the inauguration, Joe Biden thanked Milley for undermining President Trump in the final weeks of his presidency. Milley, before reaching out to China, sat down with the service's top officers and demanded from them what amounted to an oath. None of them would launch a nuclear weapon without his direct approval. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff went behind the president's back to secure control over the nation's most important weapons. That sounds like a coup to me. I don't know about you, but that sounds like an actual coup to me. Our generals are losers abroad, and that's proven by the France article I read to you at the beginning of this episode, and grifters at home, proof given by the articles about wokeness I've been reading to you, about the guy on the cover of Playboy, about the article in Teen Vogue trashing this country and telling our children to become grifters. Let's get back to reading. They parrot MSNBC talking points on Twitter, and grovel before Fauci. This is bad enough, but Milley's actions show that America's top military officers have reached another level of delusion. They fancy themselves a new Praetorian Guard to protect the nation, as construed by elite editorial boards from the people's elected representatives. This deep state is in control. It is clear that no populist elected leader can trust America's security establishment. As Chuck Schumer warned President Trump on Rachel Maddow's show in 2017, the intelligence community has 6 ways from Sunday of getting back at you. The military establishment is gloating now and flexing its muscle. After the election, outgoing Syria envoy Jim Jeffrey admitted that the Pentagon and State Department has consistently lied to Trump about troop levels in Syria. Before he left office, Trump's order to have troops out of Afghanistan by January 15th was overruled by the establishment. Trump, far from trying to start a war on his way out of office, sought to actually end one. White House spokesperson Jen Psaki claims that Milley was following constitutional orders to prevent unlawful military actions. According to her, Trump was implementing an insurrection. That's the actual big lie. The claim that Trump wished to start a war to distract from the election upon which Milley based his collusion with the Chinese government was an utter lie. Nor was Trump implementing an insurrection. The FBI has dispensed with this myth, finding that there was no coordinated plot associated with the Capitol riot. There will be no hearings, no serious journalistic investigations or outcry from the establishment. Milley will go unpunished, Milley. He will retire with full honors and full pension. The Pentagon will never reform itself from the inside. The entire military-industrial complex must be dismantled if we are ever to have an armed forces consistent with the with the founders' Republican virtues. And I can hashtag amen to that all day. The American right must be willing to starve the Pentagon of its lifeblood. The most important asset the people have is their bodies. American mothers and fathers need to stop feeding their children into the machine. Amen. Amen. Heartland American boys and girls have better things to do and better leaders to serve under. The American people must go on strike until the generals once again learn to subordinate themselves to the people. GOP politicians must assist their constituents in this noble task. They must find real courage and demand radical institutional change. This starts with deep and abiding budget cuts, for the Pentagon and the rest of the military-industrial complex. The founders' distrust of permanent standing armies must be restored. And I believe that. I believe there should be some checks and balances. There should be something implemented that keeps the generals under control. All right? The people run the government. That's the way it's supposed to be. The world has changed. America's grand strategy must change with it. Our current conventional force cannot defeat insurgencies. The proliferation of nuclear weapons, on the other hand, means the great power conflict is virtually impossible. There's no need to keep buying weapon systems designed to fight a redo of World War II. Our bases overseas are a relic of the liberal humanitarian world order. Having 20,000 troops in Okinawa did not prevent the Chinese Communist Party from using Twitter bots to stir up hysteria over COVID. Our dozen aircraft carriers didn't stop our politicians from implementing lockdowns and vaccine passports. America's air bases in Turkey, Germany, and Diego Garcia didn't keep the Taliban from retaking control of their country. All right? That's true. They're not updated, and our government does not have the will to do the right thing, regardless of what the American people want, even though it's not supposed to work that way, even though the founders explicitly state that is the American people. It is the American people who are in charge. That's why they developed and designed our Constitution and our government the way that they did. Trust me, they did. Read the Federalist Papers sometimes. Read them. It'll enlighten you. You'll see. You'll go, oh my God, that's why the founders did this. That's why the founders did this. America was never the world's policeman. An empire in the name of democracy and freedom was always an idiotic idea. Widespread gun ownership is a much better guarantor of American liberty than any SEAL team or aircraft carrier. The Militia Act of 1792 is a much better model for national defense than our current setup. The act enrolled every able-bodied male citizen between the ages of 18 and 45 into the militia. It also demanded that each of these men provide themselves with a good musket or firelock and a sufficient bayonet. Far from trying to take away firearms, the founders demanded every American male citizen possess one. Now, I don't know how that would work today, but we should definitely be talking about all the different options we could explore. Self-sufficiency in arms is the foundation of liberty, national sovereignty, and independence. Tyrannies never arm their citizens. Republics always do. Our security as a nation should not depend on overhyped super soldiers. The silent professionals with their podcast, book deals, and TV appearances play, in the grand scheme of things, only a very minor role in protecting the life, liberty, and property of common American people. The unmitigated corruption in the leadership of the armed forces is a sign of deep cultural rot. The patriotic flag waving of the post 9/11 response has been used to great harm against the American people. I'd say that. What do you think? An unwillingness by the political class to criticize and hold accountable those charged with defending the nation has led to our current spiritual crisis. It's at least aided in it. It's at least helped get us here. America can't win overseas. Her generals sell out her leaders to foreign powers. And the retired members of this elite class do nothing but gobble up fat checks from the corporations they once purchased from. This is an untenable state of affairs. It's time to restore Republican virtue to sweep clean our military establishment. Woo, that's a good article, folks. Again, that's Josiah Lippincott. That came from AmericanMind.org. The title of the article is Deep State, Deep Trouble. And the quote at the top was, America's woke generals and the military-industrial complex must be purged to save the nation. I believe so. I believe at least big changes should be here. There should be accountability. Somebody should put Miley in his place. Somebody should put these generals in their place. Somebody should restore the Constitution in the United States of America. It's us, you and me, folks. With a loud enough roar, we can start making these changes. But you can't be afraid to speak up. And why should we care? Why should we care? Why should we clean out the woke military-industrial complex? Is it the fact that in 9 months, Biden's mucked this country up beyond belief? Is that not enough? Is the realization that Marxist elites want to enslave our children to the system because it makes them money not enough? Is living in fear because of illegal immigrants, gang members, and meth heads roaming the streets not enough? How about not being able to afford diddly squat because of inflation? How's that been, folks? What about having your intelligence insulted while the government lies to you again and again and again about COVID and everything else? That one always breaks my camel's back. Here, I've got one for you. I've got a really, really juicy one for you. A story that will break the resolve of the last silly holdout who still believes the government and the left are telling the truth and have their best interest in mind. This is the one. This is the story that you won't see on the news. Exclusive. Representative Markwayne Mullin, 2- and 3-year-old Americans died in Afghanistan due to Biden's failed withdrawal. All this distraction, all this wokeness, all the things going on in the world. Meanwhile, babies, American babies are dying, and you haven't heard a thing about it. This is on Breitbart. It's Hannah Blue putting it down on paper. A 2-year-old American and a 3-year-old American died in Afghanistan as a result of the Biden administration's failed withdrawal from the country. Rep. Markwayne Mullin, this is the Republican representative out of Oklahoma, whose team is working firsthand on the ground to save stranded Americans. He told Breitbart News on Saturday that 2- and 3-year-old American babies died. They died in Afghanistan. Mullin, who traveled to Afghanistan and whose team is working firsthand operating what he likened to the Underground Railroad to get Americans and legal permanent residents and allies out of the Taliban-run country. He told Breitbart News Saturday that the Biden administration failed. They failed to assist his team in getting people out of the country, which has resulted in U.S. casualties, largely unreported by the Biden administration. Mullin briefly described what his team is doing in Afghanistan, attempting to get the people Biden abandoned out of the country to safety. Many told him the State Department was not helping them. Quote, so we put a team together really quick. We had arranged to get them even outside the airport, he said. Mullin explained most did not realize many of the people could not even get to the Kabul airport because there were 3 checkpoints that were charging between $500 and $1,000 to go through. So even to get to the airport for one person, it was $1,500 at the minimum. And you're talking about a country that didn't have any banking system, he says, explaining how his team essentially set up an underground railroad, getting people out of Kabul by transporting them to nearby countries in the region. His team has a full ground operation, operating 20 safe houses and 40 vehicles. And they've even been able, to move people out, almost every single day. Quote, I mean, yesterday we got 3 Americans out and 4 Brits. The day before that, we got a couple, he explained, but the successes have not come without devastation. Mullin revealed that they've lost a handful of Americans, including a 3-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy. And this, folks, this is what sickens me the most. The news has moved on. They've moved on. Where are all the headlines? We're going to be back in Afghanistan. Mark my words. We're going to end up back in Afghanistan. because every day there are still Americans fighting to leave. Every day there are still Americans dying in Afghanistan. And how can an American, after they've lost everything, after this country has been taken over by the Taliban, how can they get past all these checkpoints? How can they transport themselves without groups like Mullen's group? But this group, these people, they've been stonewalled by Biden and his folks all along the way, screwed by the left. And as a result, babies, American babies, are dead. And people are still dying. They're still dying. It's absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. He said the news isn't reporting it, which is actually why I'm reporting it to you here at American Reveille, because I haven't seen this anywhere on the news. Just finally seen an article on Breitbart, but I haven't seen it anywhere else. For instance, we had a 3-year-old girl that had a severe infection in her legs. This is horrible, guys. And we tried to get her out. We had her in Kabul. We tried to get her through the airport there. Her parents were LPRs. They're legal permanent residents of the United States, which means there are responsibility. Mullen said that the State Department would not take them in because the girl's parents were LPRs. And when we realized they weren't going to let her through, we took her out on the 31st of August and started driving her and her family across Afghanistan. They had to drive her across Afghanistan. They eventually got them to the border of Tajikistan, where the ambassador told him that Washington told him not to assist Mullen in any way. You hear that? Who in their right mind, who in Washington sees a little girl with severe leg infections, a 3-year-old, tells her to kick bricks to go F herself? Won't help her. She eventually dies. This is Mullen talking. I said, excuse me? You can't. I'm an American citizen. Because he said I wasn't traveling officially. And I said, I know, I'm traveling on a blue passport. I'm not here officially. I'm not here in my official capacity, but I'm trying to get somebody. I'm trying to get an American out of a war zone, a war area. This 3-year-old baby needs medical attention. You're telling me someone from Washington told you not to assist me? Who was it? He said, I can't tell you that. That's what Mullen's reporting. This is a congressman. He's telling you they wouldn't help. The State Department told him no. They told another country to tell him no, and they couldn't tell him who, what, where, why, or when. Mullen said he replied, if you don't tell me now, the next time you're going to hear from me, it's going to be in another capacity. That's the only threat because we're going to have to find out, he said, noting that the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, promised to have a hearing and investigation on the matter if Republicans take the House back. Quote, so we may have to wait 15 months. We may have to wait 15 months, but we're going to find out, he added, because they wouldn't help us get her out. September 10th, she passed away from septic. He said of the American child, this 3-year-old child, she passed away from septic. That was 8 days before. All right. That was 8 days before they could have gotten her out. They literally were there 8 days earlier and they could have gotten her to medical attention. But somebody at the State Department sentenced a 3-year-old girl to death. She passed away from septic. Her parents had to watch her die. We could have gotten her out. Her parents, he said, asked him not to reveal her name. He said they don't want anything to do with the U.S. because they feel like we abandoned their child, which we did. Not us, not the guys down there working, but the United States, because we could have got her out. We talked about reputation earlier, right? We talked about reputation, what other countries think of us. This is something that makes other countries look at us like we're disgusting. This is what makes people hate Americans. And the left is responsible. The left is in control of the government, and the government is killing people. The congressman said the State Department knows who the girl is. He also revealed that they lost a 2-year-old boy and his mother on the day 13 U.S. service members died from the attack at the airport, explaining he's certain they were killed at the gate. Have you heard about them? No. You hear about the 13 barely from the mainstream media and the left, but you don't hear about the others. And the State Department hasn't reported that they were killed at the gate, he said. He explained they were at the gate because they were going to pull them out. They refused to let them in. They refused to let them land. And Mullen said we were already supposed to have them out of that gate. She couldn't leave because they couldn't afford to come back. He said, noting that CNN reported they died in a rocket attack. Think about this, guys. All right. All the gates they told you about, the checkpoints, the Taliban checkpoints, charging between $500 and $1,500 to get across. So say they're $1,500 each. All right. You spend all of your savings. I don't know about you, but not many of us have $4,500 in the bank account right now. You spend all of it going through it and you can't turn back. You got to stand at that gate for hours, for days, because if you go through the Taliban checkpoints, they might kill you and you'll never get back through because you have no more money. Die one way or die another. So you stand at the gate and you get blown up. You're hoping, you're praying. You're thinking, America is coming for me. I'm an American. But instead, you die at the end of the blade. You die at the end of the explosion. You die because America abandoned you. It says she couldn't leave because they couldn't afford to come back. He said, noting that CNN reported they died in a rocket attack. He said it's a lie. He confirmed these were 2 American citizens and said the State Department knows because they were approved to pull them out that day. Every one of these people could have gotten out. It wasn't like maybe. We could have gotten them out. We were getting people out, and we could have gotten them out. It wasn't maybe. We had them in a position to get them out, and the State Department failed to help us. All they had to do was literally allow them to come in the gate, and we couldn't get them permission to come in. He explained that the Biden administration is not being transparent. And if the first time you're ever hearing about this is on this show, then that's proof to you that they're not being transparent. Among the other countless things they're not being transparent about. Quote, they're not telling the truth of what happened. They're not even telling the truth about why they pull out on the 30th, he said. Currently, Mullen and his team, they're still moving 65 Americans and permanent residents, providing transportation and housing to get them out of the country, to get them out of Afghanistan. Wow. Absolutely wow. This guy has everything against him. There's others besides him. All kinds of folks are helping get people out. They have everything against him, and they're still fighting against everything. They're fighting against the progressive left, the elites, the system, the State Department, Joe Biden himself. They're fighting to save Americans. God bless them, and we'll pray for them. We need to pray for these heroes. But this is the real story. This is what's actually happening. This is what's actually happening in Afghanistan. And this is what's actually happening in America. All right? This is what's actually happening in America. All the while they try to shove their woke Kool-Aid down our throats. All this wokeness is so important, right? Tree equity. Tree equity, folks. Tree equity. All this wokeness is so important. We're going to have space equity next. Next, they're going to say the moon. We need racial justice for the moon because the moon goes through cycles. And at certain times of the month, the moon appears to be darker than others. The moon's wearing blackface. The moon must be a white supremacist. All this wokeness. It's so important, isn't it? All right. All this equity, this BS equity, this mask for racism. It's so important. Reintroduction of racial segregation. That's happening in a lot of schools across the United States. That's a product of this wokeness. It's true. Look it up. Look it up. All this wokeness. It's so important. They say capitalism kills. They say capitalism kills. The normalization of LGBT ideology, not as its own community, but as the only community. All this wokeness, it's so important. They say capitalism kills. Let's think about that. Capitalism kills. They say capitalism kills while our almighty progressive leaders murder American babies. Let me say that again. While our progressive leaders, our almighty progressive leaders, hallelujah, murder, while they murder American babies and destroy American minority communities through Planned Parenthood. They say capitalism kills while our almighty progressive leaders murder American babies and destroy American minority communities through illegal immigration. They say capitalism kills while our almighty progressive leaders murder American babies and destroy American minority communities through public education. They say capitalism kills while our almighty progressive leaders murder American babies and destroy American minority communities in Afghanistan and through the actions that they take there. The Marxists distracted us with woke nonsense to divide us. Meanwhile, actual children, damn it, are dying because of woke progressive ideology. My name's James Lane. I'm a modern conservative, folks. I'm a little different than the old school ones, and I'm a little different than the new school ones, but I'd like to consider myself a modern conservative. And I choose capitalism. I choose capitalism over woke, progressive elitism. And I hope you will too. I really do. I really hope you will too. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been fun. It really has. It's been fun, but I've got to run. Folks. Remember to bookmark us at AmericanReveille.com. That's Reveille.com. Sign up for the newsletter. Please, please, please hit the donate tab if you'd like to help us out with operating expenses, and contact me directly at JamesLane@AmericanReveille.com. That's James Lane at AmericanReveille, Reveille.com for sponsorship opportunities, business collaborations, and writing gigs. I'm always looking for new writers and bloggers, so please email me. Again, that's James Lane at AmericanReveille.com. Folks, it's been great. I hope you have a great week. I hope everybody has a successful, blessed week, and I will see you on episode 175 of American Reveille with James Lane.